I think the concern that I do hear, I mean, well, number one here from agencies, I mean, in a lot of these black boxes, like PMAX, for example, things like that, is going to automate a lot of the things media buyers and planners, in theory, should be doing now, right? I mean, the
Right.
reality is a lot of times it doesn't go to set and forget it, right? So
Mm.
how much optimization is really going on? I mean, there's some, but maybe there could be more, you could argue. But looking at the black boxes, if they're doing a lot of the optimization, it does take some work away from the agencies, right? So I think there's going to
Yeah, for
be, I'm
sure.
seeing some pushback or at least concern, like, okay, I mean, we have an FTE model, right? Does this put pressure on that? I mean, in theory, it
Yeah.
does, right? So I think agencies, I mean, on one hand, they're making investments in AI, but on the other hand, I think there's some concern about, okay, we can't move too quickly. And if we, and I think, the double-edged sword is we tell brands we invested in AI for automation, at some point they're going to ask us, where's the savings?
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
I am Kevin Lee with the E-Marketing Association. I also run an agency, a brand, a nonprofit, and have a bunch of other things cooking. Super excited to be chatting today with Rio Longacre, who runs Slalom Consulting and is super active in the programmatic and monetization side of the ad ecosystem on both the publisher side and the advertiser side. So I'd love to hear sort of what your elevator pitch these days is when you go out and chat with folks, when you're sort of telling them what problems you can help them solve.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Great to be here. I was looking forward to this for a while. I'm glad we could make it work. So as you mentioned, I work at a place called Solemn Consulting. I'm a managing director there. I lead our horizontal that's focused on what we call advertising, marketing, strategy, and transformation. So that includes everything from helping organizations understand what kind of customer experience do they want to create. We do that with quantitative research, ethnographic research, journey mapping, a lot of those like CX tools. We also help organizations create the right structures and operating models in order to support that vision. And that may include what types of roles do they have, how they're structured, who does what. I guess you call that like more marketing transformation. And then I think most importantly, the majority of the work we do is helping these organizations, whether they're brands or agencies. We're increasingly doing work with agencies, and then to your point, we do work across both buy and side. So marketers as well as with publishers, helping them pick the right tools, implement the right tools, measure how those tools are performing, and then use that as kind of that closed loop to inform the strategy and validate that it's the right one.
Great, great. That's a great synopsis. One area that I'd love to dig a little bit deeper into is, usually if you sort of think about the publisher side of the ad ecosystem and the advertiser and agency side of the ecosystem, people automatically assume that it's adversarial, right? The advertiser wants to get the inventory less expensively, right? And the publisher wants to improve their yield. And so one thinks that that's automatically a situation where there's no win-win. But one area which has been fascinating to me is the idea that as publishers gain more first-party data and can then layer on that incremental targeting for the advertiser, it's actually a win-win, right? Because you have the scenario where the media is just better targeted, which is what the advertiser wants for obvious reasons, right? And what the publisher wants because the advertisers who have more control are willing to pay a little bit more. So I'd love to delve a little bit more deeply into that, and whether you think this is sort of an ongoing trend that publishers are sort of building these first-party repositories of data, opt-in emails, and in some cases potentially mobile numbers as well, but that generally some kind of PII that will allow them to better service the marketers.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think you think it would be win-win, right? At least it should be win-win, right? I
Right.
think a lot of the time it hasn't been, right? I think what we've seen. I mean, I started as a media buyer, right? I think you find that you go to the advertisers and say, well, you can pay, the CPM of this, but you're going to get better results. And then, a lot of times they say, no, that's too expensive. Go with the lower CPMs. I think it kind of goes back to that maybe fork in the road, you could call it, about 20, 25 years ago, we took us to industry, right? When we went to programmatic, which, the promise of it was we can automate this, right? Or at least a lot of it, right? You don't have to, not everything has to be direct deal. I mean, back in the day, we were everything was direct deals, right? We were faxing and insertion orders, right? You remember those days?
I
Maybe not
do
so
indeed.
fondly, but but yeah, but programmatic, we can automate this, make it, and we can in theory boost monetization and boost yields dramatically, right? But I think what we saw was on the buy side that to favor lower cost CPM. And I was guilty of it too back when we were hammering out deals back in the day, even when it was manual, right? And then I think because of things like that, you've seen a lot of like MFA sites being mixed in, right? And we've even tried pulling those out. And then you say, why did CPMs go up? Well, we took out all the garbage, right? But unfortunately, those they tend to attract, do pretty well when you're looking at performance. It's probably not where you want to be spending your money, right? So I think you factor in things like that, and it has been maybe a little more adversarial than it should be. But to long-winded way of answering your question, the trend of using first-party data, it becoming more important, is a really positive one. And it's interesting. I think most of what we saw, so we started working with like first-party data uploads initially to DSPs, but increasingly into clean rooms, right? Initially, it was more media clean rooms. We did a lot of work with Amazon Marketing Cloud. Increasingly started doing some work with ADH, the Google version of that. But I was mostly on the buy side, right? In order to, I know his basic use case is suppression, right? And that can give you a tremendous boost in ROAS, right? But then building custom seed models, things like that. And then I think recently we've seen more interest on the pub side, which is great. And despite pubs having this incredible first party data, I mean, a lot of them have been forcing logins for a long time. Many have paywalls, right? But I think despite that, I think they've been kind of reticent to monetize on that or to use it, but that's starting to change. And I was joking the other day. I think this is the year of pub tech because of that. So I think we're going to see a lot of interesting investments coming down the pike. We already are.
Great. I mean, one of the other sort of changes that's sort of in the midst right now is, the opposite of the old insertion order where you sort of defined your audience in an IO and that was how you decided who you were buying. Is these sort of black box models like that are sitting either within GAM or outside of GAM, and to some extent, you're trusting the AI to make decisions around, okay, how do we get this right message to the right person at the right time in the right context, right? And do you feel like that's a positive and that the AI technology is going to be able to fulfill on that promise and do a better job sort of predicting that this impression really belongs here? Or do you feel like there's actually potentially an erosion of trust because the media buyer is like, wait a minute, like I know nothing about this algorithm. I know the demographic and psychographics of my target audience. I can even give you personas and context keys that I want to, trigger on. So what's this black box going to do that I can't do?
I mean, in theory, yes, it should make a huge difference, right? But I think the concern that I do hear, I mean, well, number one, here from agencies. I mean, in a lot of these black boxes, like PMAX, for example, things like that, is going to automate a lot of the things media buyers and planners, in theory, should be doing now, right? I mean, the reality is a lot of times it doesn't go to set and forget it, right? So how much optimization is really going on? I mean, there's some, but maybe there could be more, you could argue. But looking at the black boxes, if they're doing a lot of the optimization, it does take some work away from the agencies, right? So I think there's going to be, I'm seeing some pushback or at least concern, like, okay, we have an FTE model, right? Does this put pressure on that? I mean, in theory, it does, right? So I think agencies, I mean, on one hand, they're making investments in AI, but on the other hand, I think there's some concern about, okay, we can't move too quickly. And I think the double-edged sword is we tell brands we invested in AI for automation, at some point they're going to ask us where's the savings, right? So I think agencies are a little concerned. I think from the pub side, there's more, right? Because don't get pubs started on GAM, right? I mean, or their whole history with Google, right? There's that whole lawsuit recently. So, and there's a lot of, I think, unhappiness about black box methodologies Google rolled out, right? I mean, there was a whole, was it called Poirot? Was that right? There's that whole initiative they had in order to like set the floor plate, rig the floor pricing, set the floor prices. So, but in theory, yeah, I mean, I agree with you that it should open up better optimization. It should open up, better performance, better, it should be win-win for everyone. From the pub side, it should drive yields up, right? If you're going to be optimizing, if you really have the best inventory, you should be optimizing that, and you should be steering it towards the the higher bids. But I think what's interesting too is like a lot of pubs I talk to, like even looking at some of the signal loss that's going on, Kevin, right? It's like let's say a DSP sets a frequency cap at 10, right? I mean, it might be that all of the idealist traffic doesn't even get bid on, right? So that could really penalize a pub and drive down yield significantly.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And of course, the industry is so fragmented at this point that you even have some agencies that, in addition to their own trading desk, may have a secondary DSP or are using multiple DSPs at once. And so the whole concept of frequency capping is potentially flawed because you don't have a single source of truth with regards to frequency caps. And I guess good news or bad news, the third-party cookie at least is still alive within some of the browsers for the time being and within some of the ecosystems. So in theory, one could potentially still frequency cap, but this idea of viewability also flies in the face of frequency capping, because did they see it or did they not see it? And if they only had a 4% chance of seeing it, then why did you frequency cap it, right? Because that's not good news for anybody, right? Because they didn't see it. So do you feel like there needs to be sort of a rethinking of the sort of generally accepted principles of frequency capping and the way they're used by media buyers as it relates to the fragmentation of even counting them properly?
I think so. I mean, frequency caps can be highly effective, and we do a lot of analyses, let's say within retail media, and we find that wow, after so however many number of ad impressions, it just falls off a cliff and it's just not worth it, right? So I can
Right.
see the benefit of it. To your point, I mean, if as IDs go away, and you mentioned third-party cookies, yeah, they're here, but at some point, like Google makes it opt in, opt out, depending on the language. I think there could be lawsuits around the language, depending on that. I mean, we could be looking at up to 80%, right, being cookieless, and and it's funny if you ask the pubs would rather just get away with them altogether, have no one have any third-party cookies, because then you don't have to worry about ID with ID, without ID. Does the frequency, who are the DSPs bidding on? So I think it really creates, in their opinion, what's potentially an even playing field, right? But we're not there. And to your point, third party cookies, after Google rug pulled us again, right? I mean, they're at least sticking around for a while. So, but I think that what we're seeing too is it's not just going to be cookies. There are other identifiers. And to the point you made earlier, first party data is becoming more important.
Right, right. I'd love to come back to something you mentioned in your intro, which is sort of user journeys and conversion rate optimization. Because something that was different when you and I were involved in media buying in the mid 90s and early 90s in my case, is it used to be like you would go to somebody, no matter whether they're a broadcaster or a publisher, and the more you bought, the cheaper it got. Right now that things are auctioned, it's quite the opposite. Depending on the elasticity of the marketplace you're in, the more you want to buy, the more expensive it gets at the margin, which some old school media buyers took a long time to come around to that entire mathematical inversion, right? You can't have a three martini lunch and negotiate a better deal because you buy more anymore from many of the platforms or places that you buy media. As a result of that, right, now conversion rate optimization, or understanding more about LTV of your best customers, all those factors influence how much you can afford to bid for media at the margin, right? So if you have a bad user experience, you can then not afford the media that your competitor can, because they have a good user experience. And so it's been interesting in our case, certainly under the Did It hat, that we end up having to buy agencies that had creative chops just in order to go in there and fix those things, because we couldn't afford the media that the clients wanted to buy unless they got fixed, right? And so we do you feel like that is well understood, throughout the ecosystem, that it can break, something can break post click, right? And that impacts the ability of the engine to buy the media.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, it's interesting too. You mentioned about the pricing differential. Whenever I think about media buying and martinis, I think that's seen in the morning show, right? During the upfronts, that's just wild, right? Where like they're just that was like a 10 martini lunch, right? So, a lot of media still does, I guess still gets bought that way, right? But to your
Yeah,
point, I mean, certainly, maybe linear TV does, right, during the upfronts, but
yeah.
scatter market certainly doesn't, and looking at CTV, most of it's not getting bought that way either. But looking at programmatic to the point earlier, it's automated, right? It makes it different. It's a different way to do it. I think we are seeing on the pub side, like I have one, there's one European broadcaster I've been working with, and I was shocked actually how much they're discounting some of their inventory that's sold through principal deals, right? So I was shocked. It's just a
Interesting.
fraction, right? So the fact that still goes on quite a bit. A lot of media is bought that way, bought by agencies, and then they buying in bulk for cheaper. But if they're not
Mhm.
doing that, you're right. I mean, if they're just going in and especially with some of these, like, I mean, the CTV costs, I mean, they're going down, but CPMs have been very high for that. Especially, I think Netflix, it was like almost $50, something crazy like that when they first launched, and those have fallen
Yeah.
down, crashed back to earth a little bit as more inventories come into play. But yeah, depending on how you're buying, I mean, and also depends on deal format, right? Is it, if you do an open exchange, going to be cheaper probably? I mean, it's funny too. Like, remember Jeff Green, speaking of DSPs, like he was saying how, in his opinion, after study has shown how if you have an auction, it'll drive prices up. I don't know. I mean, on the pub side, I don't know if they would agree necessarily. I think it can drive up, but if you're like doing direct deals, I mean, I'm seeing higher CPMs with direct deals, whether it's PMPs or PGs, right? Obviously you get auctions in some of those, but I think we're seeing higher CPMs, better yields, and better results, frankly, from the advertiser side, and some of those that are more direct. So it's almost like we went totally automated, and now we're seeing kind of a revival now of more direct sold deals,
Hmm.
especially in the pub side, which is interesting.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Do you feel like IVT has had something to do with that, invalid traffic or traffic quality that you sort of feel like, okay, at least if I'm buying direct via a deal ID or PMP or whatever the case may be, the publisher may have a problem with some invalid traffic sort of coming in through channels that they're not aware of, right? But for the most part, they know it's not in their best interest to have bad traffic, right? Because they're judged on the quality of their traffic. And that's the whole value proposition that their sales team is putting forward. Buy direct through us because you'll get the good stuff, right? So do you feel like that's sort of the current mantra really for them that it's, you're getting humans, right? You're getting above the fold, don't worry, we'll take care of you. It's white glove treatment.
That's part of it. I think, these direct deals, you probably more better likelihood you're going to get less IVT, right, and more human traffic. But I mean, it's a problem everywhere. I mean, I almost wish there was more concern about it. To be totally honest, I mean, I've done media audits before, right, where you do them and then you show it to the media buyer and they're just unimpressed. It's like, well, it's like 15%. It's a lot, right? And then and it's been surprising. I mean, even more sometimes. Sometimes it's over 20%. You can easily prove is not human traffic, depending where they're getting their media from, right?
Sure.
Um, and I found it really kind of interesting, let's put it this way, that there's not as much concern as there should be. And I guess part of the thing is too, like, it's like fear of finding out, right? I mean, okay, someone picked that agency, someone's been managing them, right? And then there's been a lot of invalid traffic or non-human traffic. Okay, so who wasn't checking in, right? So I
Yeah.
think that's part of it. And I guess if you'd asked me 5 or 6 years ago, I would have expected more hand wringing and concern over it than I currently see. Because we've even done media audits where we find a lot of invalid traffic, and then the brand says, "Oh, we're so pissed off, we're putting the account up for review," and then they pick the same agency again. So I don't know,
Yeah.
but that's
I
part
mean,
of the
it's
equation.
interesting. Yeah, you reminded me of an article I wrote probably like 15 years ago or thereabouts, where I was sort of like wondering, you know, when I had seen bad media plans and auditing them in the past, and I think I continue to see this to some extent, I sort of see really bad ones, and I sort of wonder, was it just because the agency wasn't paid enough to devote the number of hours to do the right kind of a media plan, right? Because if you look at the number of hours required to buy the right media mix versus the easy media mix, right? Obviously, any agency would love to just only have to buy that one Super Bowl spot, and that's all they have to traffic. That's pretty easy,
Yeah.
right? And you can spend your 6 million right there, right? To spend that same 6 million and buy all the right eyeballs in all the right places, it's more work, right? Of course, AI may go in there and say, no, 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 the AI will take care of it. But if you sort of were to use the standard methodologies of identifying, the segments and finding out where do they hang out and where can we get, ad units that break through the clutter, right? That's a lot more work than buying a Super Bowl spot. So, I was sort of wondering if it was sort of like, where does the blame lay, right? Does the blame lie on the agency because they did a lazy job, or were they not paid enough to do the job that they should have done, right? And was that back on the purchasing team at the client who beat the agency down to 6% of media, right? And that's why they couldn't afford to do it the right way.
Yeah, uh, it's a really good question. I think it depends, right? I think a lot of
Okay.
times, maybe the agency just did drop the ball, but I also agree with you. I mean, if you're gonna you get what you pay for, right? If you like, I saw one RFP I just met 7 or 8 years ago where there's a big global one too, where the it was a CPG company. They actually, I think they'd asked for zero or close to zero margin. They basically said in the RFP, we expect you to take what you're going to take anyway, right? Um, but we want you to like, so it's crazy, right? I mean, yeah, what are you
Yeah.
going to get? Like, you're going to get them, they're going to steal as much as they can, not steal, but they're going to take as much as they can, and you're going to get the D team, right? So I think you get what you pay for. I've done assessments too. We get called in, and things are not going well, and you realize, wow, they're not paying them enough to really support this, right? So
Yeah.
they should be paying more if they, especially with what they're demanding, right? I get you're a big brand,
Right.
but you should still pay fair market value for services, right? But I do think part of it stems back to a couple decisions, right? I think one decision was, I thought it was a mistake at the time where creative and media were broken apart by the big holdcos, right? I know
Right.
smaller agencies maybe didn't do that. And I think that's why some of them are seeing a lot of success today, right? Because they have a tighter, let's say, feedback loop between creative and media and measurement. But I think breaking that apart, short term is okay, but long term, it did not have a great effect, right, on what was going on, right? And then I think additionally, like the role of procurement. You can thank consultants for that. You're welcome. We're the ones who recommended to firms you should have a procurement department 15, 20 years ago. And now we have to deal with them too. Right. And they'll beat you down. Right. Like let's say the agency comes and says it's standard 15. They're going to say, oh, well, I'm paid to beat them down. We're going to ask for 12 or 10. Right. And they're not going to
Mhm.
accept less than that. Whatever rate card you give them, they're going to negotiate you down, whatever. Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big part of it. Yeah. I mean, so I think sometimes it's the agencies, but I think um, if you want good performance, if you want to buy high quality, you're going to pay higher CPMs, and if you want white glove service, you'll pay higher rates.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point. I mean, that one of the reasons, when we pivoted out of being an SEM and SEO shop into becoming a full service mid-market agency, it did it. The reason I wanted the creative teams in-house was social, right? Because the creative would burn out so quickly that you needed to go in there with fresh creative all the time because of the lopsidedness of the social media audiences, because the heavy users would see a lot of impressions right away of that a particular creative, and so it would start to tail off pretty quickly. So we almost had no choice, right, than to sort of say, well, in order to get this to perform, we're going to need to do fairly frequent creative refreshes, right? That and to the thought of doing that with an external team and trying to coordinate that and herd the cats just seemed impossible to. So we decided to bring it
Yeah.
in-house. So do you think that continues to be an issue? Um, in a sense for the broader ecosystem, and that in order for advertising to continue to work, the creative refreshes need to be more frequent than they are, um, or ads burn out. I mean, maybe there are certain ads that don't burn out that much. Maybe the Geico ad is, will live in infinitely. Can use that gecko all over the place all the time, but even they refresh their ads, right, and come up with different things, and they have non-gecko related ads. So, you know, should that be a driver to the sort of reconsolidation of media and creative?
I think so. Yeah, I think creative fatigue. I mean, I know it's a thing, right? You see it out there. You run ads, and performance degrades over time. I mean, almost like clockwork, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, depends on the audience to a certain extent, and maybe some brands and some campaigns might stay relevant longer, but it always happens, right? So you need to swap out your creative. And I think the reliance on optimization and programmatic, and again, breaking media away from creative, had a negative impact on that for sure. I almost think that, I mean, maybe Gen AI is what fixes it, right? Like, we if we acknowledge that creative needs to be refreshed more often, right? Maybe Gen AI helps do that. Now, I don't think it replaces creatives or people. In fact, I think if anything, creative becomes like more important, right? But because Gen AI can create derivative creative really easily,
Yeah,
right? Can it
right.
churn out new ideas? Not really. I mean, not yet. Maybe it will one day, but I don't think that's coming in the very near future, right? If it is, we're all out of jobs, right? Um, but I don't think it's going to right away. But I think that, I'm seeing it great at resizing banners, making like, 6 variants of something, but the actual idea itself, making that, you need creative for that. And so I think if Gen AI helps us operationalize that creative and put it into kind of the trafficking process quicker and push through approvals quicker, which is kind of the bottleneck, right? I think if all of that happens, that would be great, and creative becomes, if anything, more important, and maybe the cycles for creative refreshes get sped up a little bit, which would be very good.
Yeah, that's a great point. It'll be interesting to see where the technology goes there, and the level of trust that the agency and brand managers have in handing over the derivative creative keys, at least initially, if not the primary creative keys to an AI. What else should people be thinking about on either the publisher side or on the brand side or marketer side that they're not thinking about in 2025?
Well, the publisher side, I mean, I really do see this as like the year that they start making some big platform investments. I'm getting in a lot of really interesting conversations right now. Should we be doing this? I mean, if we want to get more serious about yield, like let's build a world-class yield. Like let's put all the let's get the log files. Let's look at all the different signals we can get. Let's put it in one place. Let's figure out how we really do this the right way. I'm seeing a lot of interest right there, like creating those like revenue data lakes, right, and then building out yield models on top of that. That's really interesting. So I'm seeing on the pub side interest in that. I actually think if if pubs are going to be serious about, you mentioned first party data, using this to provide, whether it's sell side signals or seller defined audiences, or whether it's into bidstream, or just finding different ways in order to work with SSPs to create, or maybe go direct to DSPs, right? We're seeing some of that too. So I think that to do that, they'll need better first party data and tools to manage it. So I actually think some kind of a CDP-ish, DMP-ish type front end tool to manage audiences for publishers is, I think that's why you're hearing like Bermuda, for example. I think I'm hearing their name come up a lot these days. I think they're offering some things like that. So I think on pub side is going to be this general replatforming and investments and things like that. On the on the buy side, I'm seeing some, I think, finally, like using first party data, using it to beyond just suppression, using it for building custom audiences and building kind of bring your own models. You can take from one, let's say from one channel to, let's say, to other channels, from like one DSP to another. I'm starting to see that, which is pretty interesting, and you need better data scientists to do that as well. And then on the agency side, I think we're seeing a lot of like agencies, like they know they need to have their own IP now, right? Gen AI is putting like starting to create some cost pressures on them. They need their own IP, whether it's their own proprietary audiences. They need to have some of their own tech, even whether it's for measurement, or even that. Like I'm even working with one agency now where we're building like one front end that sits on top of a bunch of the retail media DSPs, and because one place their buyers can go. And the reason why they want this is it's going to speed things up, create efficiencies, but also they can say to their clients, hey, listen, we built this, we invested in this, you should bring your business here. So I think we're seeing some really interesting kind of investments. And then I guess the big difference on the pub side too is historically they build their own. They always wanted to, right? But I think that they're starting to realize now we don't need to build it. Let's build what we need to, but there's great stuff out there we can leverage through the SaaS model. Let's just go grab that and plug it into what we have.
Right, right. Yeah, it brings to mind an interesting conundrum, which is sort of the haves versus the have-nots, and the extent to which scale allows certain people to have things that other people can't have, right? So obviously scale comes with it just an inherent advantage in that your data becomes much more rich, much more quickly. just have more of it. So you reach a statistical significance on anything you're doing fast. And if you're small on the brand side or the publisher side, you get that data more slowly. But from an investment perspective, right, if you have to amortize an investment over the size of your enterprise, you get that same situation. Small brand, big brand, small agency, big agency, small publisher or broadcaster, big publisher or broadcaster. Do you feel like there's some leveling of the playing field maybe as a result of sort of AI-powered SaaS that will allow people who are maybe on the mid to smaller size of these organizations to take advantage of data sets that maybe they don't own, right? Or that they've leased or that are there as a result of AI, right? That level that playing field.
I think so. I mean, with scale, I mean, sure, if you're bigger, you have more money, you can make bigger investments, but it's also you move slower, right? So like the big holdcos that, no one would ever say they move quickly. And even now, like I remember I was talking to one of them we're working with, and we gave him a proposal to build out this application, and then my client said back, "Oh, we've got 600 AWS certified engineers. Why would we hire you to do this?" And I asked him, "Well, could you put 10 of them together next week to start a project, or 20 of them?" No, I mean they're all they're scattered across 30 different entities, right? And then just horse trading to get them to do something for a few months would be really challenging, right? Not impossible, but really difficult, right? So I think scale can help, but that's why I think we're seeing some. I think in the agency space anyway, we're seeing some. I think some of the indies are doing really well, right? Like I can think of a couple that I know, like Stagwell. It's a really cool story about them. I mean, they're managing billions of dollars in media now. People like working with them a lot. They had a huge presence at Cannes with Sports Speech, right? I mean, they've kind of combining influencer plus media. It's really interesting what they're doing, right? And they're moving quickly. I think Mark Penn's a good leader, and Horizon Media, and it's more of a white gloved approach, right? But they're the biggest indie now, right? I love, it's been fun watching them. They don't have the scale of the holdcos, but I think they're able to focus and put investments where they need it. And there was the big announcement with Blue, the audience platform United built, Horizon built out at the end of the last year. I think they announced it in the fall, which is pretty interesting. So I think we're seeing, scale helps, but being nimble and moving quicker could sometimes be more important.
That's a great point. Any last thoughts as we wind down the podcast?
There's a lot going on. I mean, I've never seen things change so quickly. I think that, I was just at Architecture Live, the conference. This is conference season. I just got back from that. The week before that, I was at Digital Velocity. That's the Telium one. And then there's a ramp up before that. And then obviously you go back January CS. There's been a lot of conferences. There's been a lot of stuff that's the same in those, but there's been a lot changing too. I mean, there was the recent announcements about some interesting stuff in brand safety, ad verification. You mentioned AI. I think that's where we're going to see a lot of movement now. There's been, especially in the pub side, a lot of unhappiness with some of the incumbents in terms of keyword blockers and not being able to advertise on news sites for really, they would argue no good reason. So I think this is the year we start to see a ton of change there, with some new entrants using AI to. And I see Scope 3, they had that agentic model, right? Where it's, we can, we'll put agents in there and they'll actually look at where the ads are serving up and make decisions. And then, they have humans in the loop so humans can sign off on things and adjust them. But I think that's where we're going to see a lot of really, really interesting things this year. And also just looking at addressability. And addressability is what? It's like identity plus kind of like segmentation and audience and like, I think we're going to see there's people are testing out different models, using data. And I think the more data you have, the better you can be prepared to do that. But, by looking at addressability and balancing that with contextual and coming up with the right mixes, I think a lot of brands are experimenting with that kind of right now. And, now that a lot more CTV inventory is coming available, we're seeing a lot of testing right there. So things have never changed so quickly. I think it's hard to keep on top of things. We're all trying to do it, but it's an exciting time, and I think that I do think this is the year of pub and pub tech. If you're going to ask me, what's the big thing that's going to happen this year, so that's kind of where I've been pledged to spend more of my time because I just think, frankly, it's really interesting.
Great. Well, thanks so much for joining me. A lot of great stuff to cover, and look forward to keeping up in the future.
Absolutely, Kevin. Good catching up.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in the Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.